This is the Bureau of Lost Culture. I'm Stephen Coates. The Bureau is dedicated to collecting and recollecting lost, half-forgotten, half-remembered, or just rare stories, oral testimonies and audio, often from the counterculture, from the underground, from the other side, or just from lesser-known parts of life. You can check out our work at bureauoflostculture.com. In this episode, we invite back a previous guest to share more of her stories and sounds from the time she spent as a foreign correspondent for the BBC. In the twilight of the Soviet Empire, as new countries and new states were being formed from the wreckage of the USSR, she reported daily from Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan. But whilst working, living and travelling in cities like Tashkent, Samarkand and Andujan, and crossing the borders between the family of Central Asian states with their ancient tribal loyalties, she collected an extraordinary archive of field recordings, conversations and music. And she's here to share some of them with us. She's documentary maker, radio producer and story collector, Monica Whitlock. Welcome back, Monica.
Hiya.
So, as I said, you were here last time talking about your life and times as a foreign correspondent for the BBC in Central Asia. And it was quite a story. I guess if you lived it, that was your life, your career, your job. But for anybody who's grown up listening to the voices of the foreign correspondents coming out of the radio, there is a fascination, I think, with, how that whole thing works. And we heard quite a bit about that last time, about your life working and reporting from Central Asia, mainly in Uzbekistan. And of course, the rather dramatic story of how you actually had to leave in quite a rush, accused of aiding and abetting terrorists and fleeing the country with your son and various members of your household, Uzbeks, who came to the UK. And are still here as kind of long-term refugees. But now we're going to go back there, courtesy of your kind of tape recorder, really. And you're going to take us on a sort of journey round some of those places in Central Asia that you lived and worked through the medium of sound.
What I've picked today out of my tape collection, and it's mostly recorded on cassette tapes with a mono mic. And they were all pieces of music that I came across that were not particularly designed to be recorded, but they're pieces that are recorded just in the street or in people's houses. And to me, they're incredibly evocative. They're like finding old photographs that you haven't seen for a long time. More evocative than that, because in almost all the recordings, all of them actually, I can remember exactly who I was with and what the weather was like and the intensity of the situation. And I can't remember some of the detail, like who was getting married or what month of what year. But the whole feeling and atmosphere around every piece of music comes back very strongly to me. And you'll hear that they're not all sort of beautifully mic'd up. There are all sorts of recordings. Some of them are chopped up and have been part of reports, and I haven't got the tail end of them. So they're a bit of a ragbag, but really fun to pull out of the cassettes. And I have boxes more to come. And we want to start with a piece that I really love.
I think we should have a listen, then you can tell us about it afterwards. How's that?
So this is a song performed by one of my absolute favourite musicians. He's called Karlabai, and he's playing the dombra, which is a Kazakh instrument, and the song's in Kazakh. The dombra is this two-stringed, long-neck, teardrop-shaped instrument, which you'll find all over Central Asia. And it's a particularly Kazakh thing, the two-string. And Kazakh songs tend to be ballads and songs of life and death, and they're the songs that everybody knows. Karlabai was a relative of the lovely family who lived and worked in our house in Ulitsa Yulova in Tashkent. And they were, when I said I'd really like to hear some music, they whisked me off to Karlabai's village, and we all sat in his living room. In my memory, it was extremely hot. And we sat and he sang and I recorded, he sang and I recorded, and it was just one of the most memorable afternoons. Not just the singing and the performance, but just the willingness to take a complete stranger without any kind of pre-arrangement into your house and give over your day to performing.
Where is he now?
He's still in the village.
Still performing?
I guess so. We went back a couple of times. I have a lot of Karlabai's recordings. There's something, even if you don't speak Kazakh and I don't, there's something that goes straight to the heart, I think, in Kazakh music that is just full of depth and richness, and you feel the melody all the way through, and has a very special tone.
And we're going to hear more from him right at the end. But in the meantime... Sounds like a party. What's going on there?
Well, anybody who's been to Central Asia will immediately recognise that as a wedding in Uzbekistan, or it also could be in Tajikistan, because the wedding rituals and music are pretty similar. So the long, long trumpets that you can hear, they're called surne, and they're as big as a person. And you have to, it's a real special technique. They're enormous, and the men stand outside the wall of the house where the wedding's going to happen.
Hold on a second, they're as big as a person? I mean, like in terms of length, like sort of 6 foot long or something, like an alpine horn?
Well, yeah, bigger than that. Yeah, they're huge. I mean, I can show you some pictures there. So the men play this in unison, and it's a signal to the entire community of that part of town or the village that the wedding's happening. Come on, it's time. There are certain sort of rituals attendant around the wedding. So outside the house, they'll light a fire and dance around the fire, which is, I think, a Zoroastrian tradition, or going back to that time. The men will come separately. All the men and the men's family, the men's friends, they'll all arrive at the wedding together. And then there's an enormous number of complex rituals to do with food and guests, and of course masses and masses of cooking and feasting and eating. And it's the sound of summer. This can go on from spring through to October, and it's Central Asia wrapped up in a ball in one sound. Really.
And what were they wearing?
Normally, the woman would wear quite likely a white Western-style wedding dress, or a traditional Tajik dress, for example. And she might have her face covered. And she has quite an arduous task, because she's got to stand looking very, very polite and bow to each guest. She doesn't get to she doesn't sit and relax and eat the feast. She's very much on display. And the young man as well, very stiff, very formal. And then behind them, there would be probably a big carpet. This would all be outdoors, say, in the yard, which is where this is recorded. And the fences around the yard are decorated, and there would be a carpet up, probably behind the bride and groom. There at the head of the main trestle table, and then there'd be trestles all the way down with men and women, probably separately. Older men together, younger women together, everybody in their groups, and then people would get up and dance in their groups. So the young girls together, the boys together, the grandmothers, and so on. So quite ritualized and structured.
Although it felt like it was getting quite intense towards the end. Does the intensity build up as the time goes
There's
past?
a lot of dancing to be done.
Were you doing the dancing yourself?
I have.
Excellent. Now, this is a little bit calmer.
This is the sound. This is the bird market in Tashkent, and it's the markets are where everybody goes at the weekends and other times to just buy whatever you want. And you'll get a lot of the bird fanciers coming to see little songbirds in hanging cages, which you could put outside your house. But I picked this piece not really because of the birds, although they are evocative. It's because of the blend of voices that you hear. So you can hear Russian in there and Uzbek and other languages, and it shows, especially Tashkent, what a crossroads it is linguistically, where people mix in these outdoor places. Like the musician that you're hearing now is a Russian, so it's a completely different sort of music. He's playing the accordion, and it's the kind of waltzy, tango-y, that flavour of a piece that you could hear possibly in Warsaw, or you might hear it in Romania. It very much belongs to that part of the world, but it blends in very comfortably in Central Asia because, of course, it was part of the Russian Empire and then part of the Soviet Union, so Russian is a thing. And then in a very Tashkent style, which you'll hear now, the accordion player fades out, and then the next voice you hear coming through the crowd is an Uzbek mendicant offering prayers. And those two sounds blend absolutely in this concept.
But is actually having caged birds a big thing there?
There's birds and there's creatures and rabbits you can buy. There are other different animals. It's not a big thing. It's not like one of those countries where you find birds in cages outside every door. It's not like that. But the courtyard life is a big thing. People live in the summer. It's very, very hot for a long time, and people live and sleep and eat all outside in a courtyard.
I think you mentioned last time that actually the sort of house architecture is sort of often around courtyards, right?
It is absolutely around courtyards.
Right, which gives you a kind of cooler place, and also a kind of more communal place as well, right?
Yes, and cooking outside, eating outside, sleeping outside, your whole life becomes outside. So it wouldn't be unusual. And to have trees and fruit trees in your courtyard, it wouldn't be odd to have birds too.
Let's have a listen to some more voices, as you call this one, chit-chat and prayers.
ألم يروا كما خلقنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا.
Who's that and what's she singing about?
Well, as you realise, it's prayers. It's sung prayers led by a woman who's trained. There are various names for religious women. One is Altin and the others, and they would hold religious ceremonies for women and girls and instruct women and girls, young girls in the class. I think I recorded this in Samarkand. In Samarkand and in Tashkent, there's considerable religious tradition, and the revival of religion, especially among women, is something, quite apparent. And those figures are very respected in society. People who know the right way to do things, who can conduct ceremonies and advise young girls, and they were very generous and open to being recorded. So that's why they're in the mix.
I mean, in terms of religion and how it survived through the Soviet years, I mean, obviously it was quite a tough time for sort of in an atheist society, wasn't it, if you were of the religious bent? So their religious traditions in Uzbekistan managed to survive that, did they? I mean, it's all the way through. They were able to keep practicing their faiths. And
some people didn't want to go on practicing a faith. Some people were very relieved not to have to practice a faith. But other people, I'd say the majority of people would absolutely certainly not identify with being an atheist. But within that group of people, there's a range of beliefs or a range of impulses about how important that is. I mean, for some people, it's terribly important, and it's an important part of identity.
And then for the women in those faith traditions, then how is it for them? I mean, what we would kind of consider sort of equality and stuff like that, is that part of that tradition or not? You've talked about the men and the women being kind of separated apart. Is it quite traditional in that way?
Very traditional. I mean, it depends where you are. In the middle of the city, it's going to be different, less traditional than if you're in a village where there's going to be far more separation. Women are expected to marry young. In traditional families, the man is dominant, the woman is very subservient, but not all families are traditional. There's, a whole different range of expectation there. Some women might go to university, some women might never leave home without their husband's permission. I mean, the woman that we heard in the recording, she represents an interesting sort of phenomenon, really, which is obviously a religious person and traditionally dressed and very veiled and so on, but somebody who's also a professional, because she's professional at what she does.
Let's have some more of that one.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas, malikin nas, ilahin nas, min sharril waswasil khannas, allazi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas minal jinnati.
This is a sacred spring, and it's recorded, it's just by a roadside in Samarkand. And as you can hear, lots of women are coming to wash their hands and feet in the sacred spring. And in a way, it illustrates everything about Central Asian religion. It's folk tradition, really. The sacred spring has been there for more years than anybody knows. But it has a sort of religious veneer as well. So people will come by and say prayers. Mendicants will come. Imams will come. Sort of street religious people will come and lead prayers there. And the reason that the women come and take the water is to answer their wishes. So, for example, a husband who's out of work, or most commonly somebody who hasn't yet conceived a child. That's a big thing. Medical issues, social issues. And if you want to know what the problems of a country are, go to a sacred spring and see what people are asking for. And this is the kind of place that you'll find all over Central Asia. You'll find sacred trees with rags tied, with votive trees, special rocks, springs, very tied to the earth, but with a sort of a pattern of religious observance blended into that.
Right, you mean like what we would say here, kind of pagan thing with personification of nature and nature spirits?
I guess these sites are of different ages. I don't know how far back they go, but they're spots where, for some reason or another, each one probably has its own tale. They've become associated with a votive practice. So often it's rag tying. You see trees on a bare mountain. You see a tree tied with rags all over, and each one represents a wish. I guess some of them probably goes back centuries and centuries, and some of them perhaps it's because it's near a holy site or where a hermit lives or something like that.
Yeah, so and hermits, and it sounds like the religion is much more part of their society than it is ours. I mean, obviously in the cities, centre of the city is much more metropolitan and maybe a little bit less so and stuff. But it's so the Central Asian countries generally, they are quite religious places still.
Faith matters. And I think also faith has a place somewhere where governments are not always going to heed your wishes, or where community matters a great deal, where you're hoping against hope a lot of the time. Where the health service out in the villages especially isn't all that great. Faith and belief is going to be very important.
Let's move from the human to the animal again. Absolutely wonderful sounds. I mean, makes you feel happy sort of listening to sounds like that, doesn't it? I mean, there's actually, I've got to say that about your recordings. There is a sort of joy in life in them, isn't there?
There is. And so I put in these horses because in the southern parts of Uzbekistan and in other parts of Central Asia and across the border in Afghanistan, horses are absolutely, a major thing. And this is a game called Buskashi, but it's also goes by lots of other names too. And it's an incredibly exciting and huge game played in large sandy areas where two teams of horses charged each other and the riders try and take possession of this goat. It's a bit like polo, but with a goat. It's dead, the goat.
Headless as well, I think you said.
It's headless.
Yes, it's not like polo. Polo doesn't involve a headless goat.
No, but it's that kind of thing. So it's really wild and enormous numbers of people play it. And to be a champion, you've got to be very, very brave. It's absolutely, terrible things can happen to you.
Especially if you're a goat.
Yeah, well, it's too late for the goat. And the horses move like a sort of sea up the sandbanks where the people are standing. So they all come together and you have to run and be out of the way. So it's very fast and furious. And then at the end, the prizes are given out, and they could be things like a carpet, or carpets are big as gifts, or maybe some furniture. And it's a very male thing. Women don't play it. It's very macho. Big guys, big horses, lots of noise, and nobody knows what's going to happen.
How do you know when you've won? Or who's won, should I say?
I think you take possession of the goat, or you put it down on the others. I can't tell you exactly.
Sounds like kind of rugby with the goat, right? Okay.
It's lively stuff. And
Right.
the winner is called Palwan, the powerful, the leader, the He-Man.
Right, so Monica, we're about to leave and head into another country. Before we play it, just tell us what we're going to listen to next.
Right, what we're going to do now is we're going to cross the border. We're going to go from Tajikistan across the river called the Panj, which becomes the Amur Darya, the Oxus in English, to Afghanistan. It's a short trip, just a few minutes, and there's a flat bottom barge that goes across. And it could be, people could go across for trade, or they could be refugees coming from Afghanistan, or on occasion the other way around, so refugees from Tajikistan going to Afghanistan, depending on what the political situation is.
There's a border there, but are they different people, or they're very similar people?
They're very similar people. And often they're actually related. Because, they're border people. They're different countries, but it's just a river running between. So when you cross over, you get the same languages. You get different kinds of infrastructure, because the North Bank would have been under Soviet rule for the best part of a century, and the Southern Bank not. So there are different kind of styles there, but essentially it's the same language, same food, same attitude, same way of building a house, same feeling really, and people cross very comfortably backwards and forwards.
quite different than Heathrow, isn't it? It's much more celebratory for a start.
Well, what you can hear here is stretch out, overplayed cassette tape of that darling and hero and all-time musical legend of Afghanistan, Ahmad Zahir. So I recorded it on a bus. We were waiting for shelter in a bus, waiting to cross the border, and that was the music that was playing. And you'll hear those songs everywhere. You'll hear them everywhere in Afghanistan. Although Ahmad Zahir was recording in the 70s and 60s, those songs will live forever, and everybody knows them.
So he was a huge star, was he then?
He was a huge star, absolutely, and everybody acknowledges him as the huge star and his spawn. Everybody owes something to Ahmad Zahir. You hear the barge starting, and that's this flat-bottomed motor barge that goes across from time to time, bringing people and their things.
It's amazing, isn't it? What an image! And so there's a flat-bottomed barge in a small river, and that's the border. So when does that listening to that, then does that take you back to that time when you're sitting on the bus with that tune playing and about to cross?
So I crossed several times that border. And one time was to visit a refugee camp of people who had been forced out of their homes in Tajikistan because there was a civil war in Tajikistan in the early 90s. And so they went to the place of greatest safety, which is across the river into Afghanistan. There was a huge exodus of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and they swam the river, or they floated on car tires, or they lashed together rafts, and they made camps on the other side. All those people eventually came home again, but for a while this river crossing was where UNHCR would bring flour and supplies to refugees on the other side, and eventually across that very crossing where we made that recording, they came home again. And they brought with them all these things everything that they'd had in Afghanistan. So I remember seeing people carry things like door frames to their houses. Every single thing is precious. Who would leave valuable wood behind? Nobody. Also animals. But visiting the Tajik refugee camps felt like a quite a special thing to do. So when you get off the barge on the other side, you're in a town called Kunduz, which is in the news recently. It's constantly contested as a border town. So at the moment, between the Taliban and Afghan National Forces. And outside Kunduz, we went to a town called Taloqan, which was where it's the head of what was called the United Tajik Opposition. And all in that border area, there were these refugee camps of Tajiks. And the next tape, I believe, is a rather remarkable one. It's the Tajik United Tajik Opposition Refugee Choir.
So it's the Tajik Opposition Choir, right? And tell us about them and what just for somebody who doesn't know anything about these, as I don't, the opposition, in opposition to who and what was going on politically.
When the Soviet Union ended, a civil war broke out in Tajikistan, and it's been sort of, I think that people struggling for words have given the sort of parties in the war sort of ideological characteristics that perhaps aren't always accurate, but there was a lot of tension between different regions of Tajikistan. And the people who are now in power in Tajikistan are the side that won. And they came from a southern region called Kulyab. And other regions felt that there was no place for them in the new administration, and that they would suffer, and they left. And most of the people who left as refugees left because their villages were burned down and they had nowhere to go. The war was brief and incredibly ferocious and bloody and confusing, and there was nobody to call. There were no phones, there were no ambulances, there was nobody to fall back on. There was no United Nations, there was nothing really. It was a country very isolated and alone. And people, when their villages were razed, headed for the water. They headed for Afghanistan, just as they would have done in any time of crisis in centuries past. You get over the river and you find some security on the other side. And for them, Afghanistan was that security. And they stayed there until they felt that it would be secure enough to go home.
Tell us about the choir.
Well, I mean, it's not an official choir. It's just people who were spending their time singing. I mean, which you often have in Central Asia. Music is a great resource. The human voice, great resource.
Here's the sound of war. Who's firing at who?
The year is 1996. So the Taliban have taken Kabul, and we were recording in the north of the country, which was not in Taliban control and was holding out under some pressure. So they're recordings through September, October of that year. Most of these recordings come from the city of Mazar-e-Sharif, which is one of the biggest cities in Afghanistan. And it is a really vibrant place. There's always a lot going on, and a very strong mood, I'd say, generally against the Taliban and not wanting Taliban control. So there was Mazar is famous for its what some people call the Blue Mosque, but it's the Mosque of Mazar-e-Sharif, which means the Great Mazar shrine. It's a beautiful blue mosaic mosque right in the middle of the city, and people come, mendicants come, pilgrims come for prayers. And all around the mosque are people doing anything they can to make a little money. So there's people trading and selling, and a lot of fruit selling. And all these recordings, I think, show us a city that is really trying its best to live normally, in the teeth of this feeling that you don't know when a war is going to come. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if the Taliban are going to come up from the south or not. So it's a city on edge, but always alert, always awake and around, and people trying to make money, trying to make plans, trying to think, well, if the worst happens, do we sell our house? Do we sell our gold? What do we do? Where shall I put my sons? There are those awful choices that people have to make all the time. And the sort of tension and vigour and energy in these recordings really reminds me of that time. And meeting those people who are so brave and have to think so quickly about such enormous decisions.
For us, here in Britain, I don't think any of us really understood all the subtleties of these conflicts between different parts of the country. When you were there, I mean, in that city, for instance, we heard the anti-aircraft guns, and you're saying that normal life carries on despite all that, despite all the conflicts and the warring. And was it quite a dangerous place for you to be?
I never felt afraid. Maybe that's because I'm not very brave. Afghanistan at that time was and is very hospitable, kind, protective of foreigners. Things have changed. And this is 1996. This is a long time ago. And things change, tensions change, politics change. I didn't ever feel that I was under any kind of threat from the people that I was with. We were on the northern side of the front line. And I mean, there were moments. This was before the time when people were embedded, and those sorts of journalistic practices came in later than that. So we were much freer to just sort of wander around and record people. And Mazar Sharif at that time felt pretty secure. It did fall in the end. But at that time, it felt safe and it felt almost sort of fortress-like. But there is a recording from that time that I find very evocative, and it means a lot to me. And we were invited to somebody's house, and he had musicians playing. They were playing tabla and harmonium, which are Afghan instruments. And it was just such fantastic talent and beauty, and everybody was so focused on that music, and it really blocked out all the nightmarish things that were going on outside. And in that moment, in that room, at that time, the music was everything.
Jesus, I mean, it's quite hypnotic stuff, isn't it? I mean, you can
Imagine
just
how
feel
fast-
yourself just kind of like relaxing into it somehow, you know.
Imagine how fast his fingers are moving. It's astonishing, and how you can put aside this terribly tense, difficult time of life. Who knows how long that house is going to stand? Whether those people are going to ever see each other again, or whether those families will have to leave the country, and how and when is the right moment to pack, and what shall we bring? All those decisions are hanging over that household, and yet the music just, for that moment, it stills the room.
There's something also quite urgent about it as well, though, isn't there? And there's a kind of passion to it or something, which is, it's rather trance-like at the same time. But there's a kind of energy, there's a sort of wonderful kind of energy in it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not drowsy music.
So that was in the house, and then there's some more drumming here, which is on the street.
Yeah, I put in this drumming because there's just music everywhere, really. And this was a guy drumming on a wooden crate that had held grapes. And he just started to play on it. There was no setup, no performance. He just started to play.
For you, there was, there's work to be done, and there's as you said last time, there's a dispatch to be filed every day, right? But these sound like play for you. These sound like pleasure. This sounds like this collecting of this tapestry of the sound of the life that you were living. I mean, there is something amazingly joyful about many of these sounds, right?
Sure, and there's no distinction between work and play, really. I would record stuff and then use them to make features, and I kept everything. The recording is, I was a radio reporter, so I recorded all the time. When there's a noise going on, you record it. It means that nearly all these sounds are serendipitous. They're just what happened to be going on. You get out of a car with the mic already live, and what's there is what's recorded. And sometimes they're cut off in the middle, or something goes wrong, or something happens. But they're snapshots.
So you've got pot menders here. A pot mender would be, so you've broken one of your kitchen, and you take it out and somebody, I'm assuming that this is a place where there's people who can fix anything, they can recycle stuff, and
you can fix anything, you can make anything out of anything else. So you'll find people with a bucket made out of something that used to be a tin can that's been shaped and given a handle, and things become repurposed and refunctioned all the time. You can have anything made. I've had recording cables made just in a market like this. I should just list maybe some of the things that are going on in these little sound pictures that you can hear. And one of them is people mending pots, saucepans, putting the bottoms back in of them. There are people selling cherries and people selling grapes. And people selling all kinds of things and kind of jostling for space to sell their grapes over somebody else's grapes.
Now we're on the road to Andujan. Tell us about Andujan and what we're gonna hear in this next piece.
Well, I picked this recording because the road to Andujan. We're back in Uzbekistan now, and these are some of the last recordings I ever made in Central Asia. And a drive that I always really liked doing was from Tashkent through to the Fergana Valley. The Fergana Valley is a string of towns that take, if you went from Tashkent to China, that's the route you'd take. They're market towns, they're ancient market towns, and they all have a slightly different character. And you have to drive across a mountain pass to get there. It's a long, wiggly road, and then you come down the other side, and there's the valley stretching out. And something I really enjoyed, especially in the spring and autumn, is seeing the herders coming up or down the mountains with their flocks, and sort of semi-nomadic people who are living in tents. And they always have a fierce dog on the outside, but sometimes you can get out and record a little bit. And so on the road you'd have, cars going past, but just a few meters away on the mountain sides, which, in the spring it's full of crocuses and poppies. You have this very old style of life, of herding, sheep herding. And this is a really short recording, unfortunately, but it's just a little encounter with those peripatetic shepherds. There's a beautiful place called Margalan, and they have very special pottery there, and they also have silk looms. Many Central Asian people in Fergana, but also elsewhere, they grow silkworms because there's a silk industry. And the silk is woven in many places, but especially here in Margalan. And there's a factory that's been there forever with these old wooden looms, and they're operated by young women, teenagers, girls, and they stand opposite each other. And I don't know if I can really explain this, but it's all hand operated. There's no machinery. They fly the shuttle between each other, and you can hear in the recording this clacking of the strands of the loom as it comes together, and they weave in these iridescent, amazing natural colours to make this sort of shimmering silks. And then at one point of the process, they put starch on the end of the loom, and they blow it, and it blows through the fabric, and that gives it its stiffness and crunchy silk-like nature. And these looms have been going, the loom that we saw is 600 years old, and they're using these looms. So when you're listening to the recording, imagine this big room of women all on these looms, and that's their livelihood and their life. See, listen to how fast they do it.
nima qilay? Ashlab beraymi? O'zbekcha bo'laveradimi? Boring yotaman.
It's a sort of rhythm of life. They can weave in this rhythm from childhood.
You have a recording here, and it's Wind in the Plane Trees. Tell us about that.
This is a recording of the Muezzin in Kokand, which is one of these Fergana towns, and we wanted to interview him. But when I turned up, it was time for prayers, so we did that later. And I recorded him, and it was he had such a beautiful voice, and unamplified. He just went up his tower and called, and then the villagers came. And there was as everywhere in Fergana, there's these tall plane trees which were swaying in the wind, and it's the combination of his voice and this wind was, I find it really sort of magical blend, the way that the sound just dissolves into the whoosh of the tree and the leaves. It's by no means a fancy recording, but it was a special moment.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن
Beauty of the music and the wind and the leaves.
حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة.
Sounds young, this guy.
Yes, he was young. I think sometimes we forget how musical, what the beauty of the music of Muslim
He
prayers.
sounds young, and yet the actual sound itself sounds quite ancient. So, Monica, we're coming to the end. We've got one more to go, but before we finish off with that, which is Return to the Top in a way with the singer that you mentioned before. So, hearing this stuff now, it's... How long ago is it for you now? Is it 10 years or something? Or you were last there? Or longer?
Oh, more than that. It's 15 years since I was last there, but these tapes are much older than that. These are tapes mostly from the 1990s. Not the last ones. Those are from 2005. But some of the older ones are from the 90s, and it is it's quite a feeling, them getting them out and then digitizing them and making them playable.
Does it bring it all back?
Yes, I mean, like I said at the beginning, and with each one, it's more than a photograph to me. I feel completely in that space with those people at that time, and I can tell you who was there with me and during every recording. I'm completely in the company of those people again, in a way that's more powerful than a photograph.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you so much for that wonderful sonic tour through your stories and sounds of Central Asia from your life and times. I hope you come back. Take us through some of your times in Iran and Afghanistan. That'd be wonderful. And I hope you, listener, enjoyed Monica's stories and sounds as much as I did. You can check out all of what we do at bureauoflostculture.com, and also, of course, on your favourite podcast provider. Leave us a glowing review to tell us how much you did enjoy it, if you did. And we will see you next time with more stories and sounds from the other side. In the meantime, I am Stephen Coates. This was the Bureau of Lost Culture. And Monica is going to play one more song and tell us about it first. What is it, Monica?
I wanted to go back to Carl Bay and one of my favourite songs that he sang, and it's as far as I understand it, it's a love song between a Kazakh girl and a Russian boy. I think it's that way around, and it just has this wonderful resonance to it, and everybody who was with me in that room at that time knows it's my favourite song, so I really wanted to play it.
Tashkent